So one of the things that we can do to actually control the intersection problem is to use a shape approximation on the boulders themselves. The convex hull option that we didn't want to use in the ice tree is more than useful for these rock shapes. If I click on the selection pop-out for all 24 rocks and I activate the property page, or pop up the property page for the rigid body properties, the actual shape is actually not very accurate. What I find is actually using the convex hull option works a lot better, and it tries to replicate the particles as accurately as possible. If we use some of these other shapes like bounding capsule, we'll notice that the bounding shape causes a lot of intersection of the other particles, and some of them kind of shoot off in space. So we lose a lot of control there. In our case, if we switch to something a little more reliable like convex hull, we wrap the shapes a lot better, and when the particles are simulated, you'll notice that they actually drop without separating. Any of these other shape types like bounding box will all have their problems. You can see bounding box doesn't really separate as much as the others, but when you hit a flat side to a box, the particles aren't going to roll as readily. So I'll use the convex hull option, and if I move to the bottom of my fall here, I'll sort of hit play, and you can see from here that we get a much better representation of our fall using the rigid body objects. So if I wanted to, I could actually introduce more objects into my equation by duplicating my existing 24. So if I use Control-Alt-D, I can move these additional objects, perhaps flip them around, just do a little bit of work to make them unique from the duplicates they were copied from. And every time we work with objects and we move their initial position from which all of their forces and dynamics are calculated, we need to modify the rigid body environment and set their initial state, basically set their starting position. So we get all these rigid bodies acting off of one another really nicely. So if I move back to my angle, it's right at the base of this mountain here. I hit play. So from the first frame where I want the simulation to be calculated, say from right here, 49, we get a really nice interaction of all the rocks. I could probably increase the friction that the rocks have with the ground so that we get a little more dynamic movement. So if I was to grab all 48 of these rock objects, and if we were to inspect their rigid body properties, I might make them a little more bouncy, let's say 0.25, and we'll give them some moving friction so that when they do intersect with the rock, with the mountainside, we do have a bit more grab from the mountain. So that this should cause a little more spin. So let's try that again. There we go. I think that's looking pretty good. So I think the behavior that we're getting from the rigid bodies is preferable to what we saw from the ice tree in this case. So using this as a starting point now, I could go and create the surface interaction based on the little splashes every time the particles intersect with the mountainside. So that's exactly what I'm going to do next.